few months working in Nagorno-Karabakh at the height of the conflict, and that was very tough. It was very tough indeed. It was a very severe conflict at the time. And then I went on to work in different places, and I came back to Georgia in 1997 and worked in Georgia for 3 years here. So that was the end of the 90s, where it wasn't becoming normal, but it wasn't the massive crisis that Georgia went through at the beginning of the 90s. And that was also very interesting. President Shevardnadze was still head of state. And I went away again. I came back in 2008, briefly. Connection was the crisis, 2008. And then finally, when the opportunity to come back to Georgia presented itself, in 2013, I said, yes, I'd love to. I'd love to go work again in Georgia. And also I'd like to bring my family here, because I like them, my wife said that she sometimes thought she knew Georgia better than anybody else, because I was always speaking about it, and it was a great opportunity for my wife and for the kids to come here, and they love it. So it's very good. I'm very happy.
You are a very successful person. You saw many things in your life. You've been through lots of hardship. You've been through lots of luxury. And what was those defining moments which changed your life and you chose being in United Nations?
Well, it's an interesting question. I used to work in a very different world, indeed. I used to work for a company of fine art auctioneers called Christie's, where very wealthy people sell very expensive works of art. We had very wealthy clients. It was a world of glitz to a great extent. And then, after I'd been with Christie's for quite some time, it was fascinating. I was in the picture department. We were auctioneers. We sold works of art. I visited this part of the world, and that was in 1992. I visited Armenia. And I remember a little bit like now, the flight arrived in the middle of the night. And I took a taxi to the hotel, and I woke up at 10 o'clock in the morning. I opened the window, and I looked out, and I saw a completely different world than I was used to. It wasn't a bad world, it was just something I'd never seen before. I remember taking a deep breath and thinking, well, this is a completely different experience for me. It was just obviously after the end of the Soviet period, and Armenia was going through the same transition Georgia was going through. And I realized that there were these huge challenges, but also this huge potential. And that people had a lot of fears, but also had a lot of dreams about what they could do in this brave new world. And somehow it seemed to be a fantastic opportunity to somehow support. I also went to Georgia at the same time, and Georgia was, as you know, was going through a massive transition. And somehow, after this sort of world of glitz and champagne and valuable works of art, it seemed to be much more real. And I thought, well, I could probably find a place and maybe be useful.
Did you have any disappointment?
I suppose the disappointment was that, you know, it's an overall disappointment that we were dealing with conflict which really didn't need to happen. And I'm reminded of this all the time when I see the pictures coming out of Aleppo. It's unnecessary. It's this massive suffering which has no rational reason for happening. Easy to say that. Obviously, it does happen. And it's very difficult to know how to, you know, Syria crisis has been going on for a long time. It's very difficult to know what to do now to prevent it, because so much effort has been put in by the United Nations to try to end this crisis, and it still hasn't happened. When I was working in the former Yugoslavia, I got caught in an air raid, with aerial bombardment, and I jumped out of the car into the nearest air raid shelter. It was in a school. And I was there for 2 or 3 hours with the kids during the air raid, and I realized how incredibly unfair it is on children who have nothing to do with this crisis to have to sit through this air raid and be scared. And that's the disappointment, actually. That, we've been able to evolve technologically in so many different areas, but we haven't been able to prevent these absolutely pointless and devastating conflicts.
Your views on Georgia's development and what area needs most attention?
Well, the president of Georgia has declared 2017 to be the year of education. And I think education is a fundamental. And it's not just tertiary education, it's not just university education, it's preschool, it's primary, it's secondary, it's all the way through. I think it's so important. It's not something which is necessarily going to show immediate impact, but with the right level of education progressively, year on year, maybe it'll take 5 or 10 years, but there will be an impact. Education is a key to sorting out the environment. Knowing what the major issues are in saving or fading that wrecking the environment is really important. So I think education is number one, and I think we from the United Nations are going to give the greatest amount of support we can in making sure that children have access to the type of education that they should have. The other one, of course, is health. Universal health coverage in Georgia is a really fantastic step. What we probably need to do now is look a little bit at the regulation of healthcare institutions, point one, and point two, to make sure that everybody has the same access to the same level of, equal access to the same level of healthcare. It's another important part. Another obvious factor in Georgian development, I think, is jobs and employment. A lot of people work in agriculture. We were saying before that, things change, society changes, agriculture will change, I think. We have a system of agriculture which is based around small holdings, which is great. It's fantastic to have families working on land and doing a great job, but I think it'll change. There'll be a lot more agricultural processing, I think. It's not just a question of producing food, it's a question of processing and packaging food. For example, you can produce pork, but then you can also produce bacon and ham and everything else. And it's the way you package it and the way you sell it. I think that'll be very important. So, in a sense, the modernization of agriculture is also very important. I would also like to see the territorial status of Georgia sorted out. I don't think it's great to have a portion of Georgia which is under control of a separate entity. I mean, one way or another, this is going to have to be resolved, and I think it's absolutely tragic that 250,000 people are still displaced. They aren't where they would want to be, and it must be huge suffering for them, to wake up every morning and sort of dream about the place they were born in, not being able to go there. So I think that's another aspect in development. So there are a lot of challenges, but there's progress. But I remember meeting the former Director General of the World Health Organization, a Norwegian lady, and she said to me that she had briefly been the Minister of Education in Norway. And she had really tried to emphasize in Norway how important education is. And they put a huge amount of effort into education, 20 years ago. And Norway, everybody always thinks of natural resources, of petroleum, and that's how they, but it isn't the biggest source of wealth in Norway. The biggest source of wealth is actually high-tech, IT and high-tech industry, and it's because of the education system that's now paying dividends. Georgians are resourceful, intelligent, capable people. This education component, if we get it right, we will, is going to open up huge opportunities in terms of what the market is going to be like in 5 or 10 years, which is going to be about high tech and about IT and so on and so forth. I think it's going to make a huge difference. But that's it. I always remember hearing about Norway and thinking, well, the same is absolutely true of Georgia. And I also think discipline is important. I don't mean discipline in the extreme sense. I mean just a vision of where we'd like Georgia to be collectively. And then this strong will to, when I look at Georgian dancing, I see this amazing discipline and this amazing synchronization. It's just fantastic. Or you look at the supra table, the way people are so well coordinated and the rules are respected. Or I look at Georgia playing rugby. Amazing discipline and effort. I think, why not apply the same to the economy? Yeah, and I'd like to wish Georgia and the wonderful people of Georgia the best. At the end of this year, it's been a great year, I think. It's been a lovely year in Georgia, I think, partly because we've had no big surprises, really. Stability, and things seem to be moving ahead relatively well with a few hiccups, I suppose. But no, it's the end of a long year, and I think everybody can afford to stop and rest and take breath and get ready again for 2017, which of course full of promises and challenges and so on and so forth. But all the best to the people of Georgia.